Instead of taking notes on presentations, here's our video on the Commander-in-Chief and Chief Diplomat. The powers and roles of the President are extremely important and have changed over time. The Constitution makes the President Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States. The Constitution does not provide many details about what powers are included in this role. Because of this lack of detail, presidents have been able to argue that they possess all powers needed to defend the nation or help it wage war against an enemy, as long as they do not interfere with the power of other branches or violate the law. The president may also use the military to control serious turmoil in the nation. As chief diplomat, the president decides whether the United States will recognize governments of other countries. The president determines whether the government will acknowledge the legal existence of another government and have official dealings with that government. Presidents sometimes use recognition as a foreign policy tool. For example, since 1961, presidents have refused to recognize the communist government of Cuba. This action indicates American opposition to the policies of the Cuban government. In 2011, the United States officially recognized the Libyan opposition group that controlled a region of that country as a legitimate government of the whole country.
Congress provides an important limitation on the president's role as commander-in-chief. Congress retains the power to declare war as well as the power to provide the funds to pay for the military. Even so, presidents have sent American forces into action many times without a formal declaration of war. In the early 1900s, several presidents sent military forces into countries in Latin America and Asia to support leaders who were friendly to the United States. President Theodore Roosevelt sent American troops on the USS Nashville to support Panamanian rebels in their revolution for independence from Colombia. President Lyndon Johnson deployed the forces to Vietnam without an official declaration of war. Instead, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which authorized the president to use troops in Vietnam. As the conflict in Vietnam dragged on, however, Congress decided that the continued use of American troops in Vietnam was a result of an abuse of presidential power. It passed the Wars Power Act in 1973 to limit the president's ability to wage war without a formal declaration by Congress. The War Powers Act prevented presidents from committing troops to combat for more than 60 days without congressional approval. It also allowed Congress to order the president to disengage troops involved in an undeclared war. During a war, presidents often claim increased powers to protect the nation. Congress is also more likely to give the president special powers at home as well as abroad. During World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt demanded and received from Congress powers to control prices on rations, gas, and food to manage industries needed to produce tanks, guns, and other war materials. Following the attacks on September 11, 2001, President George W. Bush expanded presidential powers as a way to fight terrorism. Just weeks after the attacks, Congress passed the USA Patriot Act. The act gave the president and the executive branch broad powers to gather information about possible suspects and to detain people suspected of terrorism. For example, the act made it much easier for law enforcement to conduct wiretaps and searches, including secret searches of the homes and records of U.S. citizens that can be carried out without a customary search warrant. Civil liberty groups and others have challenged the Patriot Act and other post-9/11 executive actions, charging that they unnecessarily strip fundamental constitutional protections at a time when the U.S. is not really at war. They also claim the Patriot Act is unconstitutional. Supporters say there are times and circumstances, such as the threat of terrorism, and that justify a stronger focus on national security. They say the Patriot Act and other executive actions strike the right balance between protecting national security and constitutional freedoms. Since its initial passage, the law has been reauthorized in 2005 and 2010, with slight modifications to address critics' concerns. President Bush also took other actions to fight terrorism. In 2001, he persuaded Congress to create a new federal department, the Department of Homeland Security, to better coordinate anti-terrorism activities across the government. Bush also put into place a practice to indefinitely detain foreigners and U.S. citizens who were captured on the battlefield. In 2004, however, the Supreme Court ruled in Handy v. Rumsfeld that the president could not indefinitely lock up foreigners or U.S. citizens without giving them a chance to challenge their detention in court. In 2006, the justices rejected the Bush administration's use of specially created courts called military tribunals to try suspected terrorists.
Hi, I'm Damien Ojeda, and I'm here to talk about executive agreements. Now you're probably all wondering, what is executive agreements? Well, that's a good question there, viewer. Well, it's a pact between the President of the United States and any foreign government. This could be about economics, politics, military, anything in general that would cause trade between any of the nations. Executive agreements do not need Senate approval. In fact, the President had the right to keep executive agreements secret from the public. But in 1972, Congress had the bright idea of making all executive agreements public. Another juicy fact is that executive agreements have the same power as treaties, so take them seriously. Thank you all for watching.